larger container. Then I just continued the addition and I kept checking the pH. It eventually got to the target pH of around 10, so I stopped the addition and I took away the separatory funnel. Then I turned off the stirring and I brought in a really strong magnet to help pull the magnetite out of suspension. When most of it had settled out, I used a beaker to pull out the excess water. I continued doing this until I got to a volume of about 700 mils, and then I transferred it back to a beaker. Just for fun, I brought back my magnet things a bit. The way that it behaved here was almost like a fit, but it wasn't because none of the particles were stabilized in any way. This meant that most of the magnetite was easily pulled out of solution, and if I left the magnet there, it eventually would have cleared up. In a proper ferrofluid though, the particles are treated, exposed to a strong magnetic field for a long period of never separate. So this treatment step was exactly what I had to do next. I cleaned up the beaker with some and slowly added 20. After it was all added, and I turned on the hot plate, the temperature, until it got around. In the last step, I brought the pH up. There was so now, the first going on was acid and that leftover ammonia. This formed ammonium oleate, which unlike soluble in water, and absorbed to the surface of the tight nanoparticle. Temperature was slowly increased, the ammonium went back at around 80 or 85 C, and by the time that it got to 9, everything separated. At this point, the particles were covered with oleic acid to make them extremely hydrophobic. After it separated, I heated it for 10 more minutes, and then I took it off all the liquid with water to wash it. I did my best to break it up, but it was really oily and all stuck together. Stir bar, and you can see how nice and dirty it was. However, it honestly was, and I just washed it with some kerosene, and when I felt like I had given the a decent enough water washing, I put the magnet to the beaker, everything off. This water washing process was then repeated 2 more. That was done, I then washed it 3 times with ethanol to get rid of any excess oleic acid. What was weird was after the first and second washing, it gave me a nice separated powder, everything clumped together again. I did this. In any case, when it was done, it looked like the washings, so I put a magnet under it to pull it all out. I let it sit for about 10 minutes and saw that there was a decent amount at the bottom. I with the mixture onto 2 small dishes. Both of them were still full, so oily, because I used way too much washing steps. In any case, to test it, I took a small piece from the main batch and added kerosene. Kerosene is a very nonpolar solvent, hopefully be able to nonpolar oleic acid that ate particles. This should allow the normally insoluble magnetite to be dispersed though it was being dissolved. However, and it's more of it as a stabilized suspension. This oleic acid also helps keep the particles from aggregating together. Ideally, the will be a stable suspension nanoparticle with a magnetic field, but still stay in solution. When I tested it, and it kind of worked, but the quality was bad. To be fair though, it did still kind of work, but it didn't look like it was completely liquid, and it also didn't spike at all. I then whipped up a much bigger batch, and it was pretty clear that this was a terrible ferrofluid side. I thought it looked cool, and it looked pretty solid. They were really, and the reason for this was that most of my particles and getting pulled up. I don't know why this happened, but there were only 2 real the magnet was big, not coated with enough elation of the 2. Seeing this, my whole process was a total failure. However, before just fun, I went online to try to find a way to salvage it. And in my research, YouTube demonstrated the most high-quality homemade ferrofluid. He didn't post a proper tutorial or a video, but he did reply in the comments. All the comments that he made on all 7 of his ferrofluid videos, and they were all opinion. His most important point is that in making ferro, 2 major is making the coated nanoparticles I already saw, and the second is pure idea that how good big or the ones that weren't coated properly. He only gave some really big, but it seemed simple enough, so I decided to try it out. I initially planned both separately. However, after seeing the pour, I didn't really think this was worth it. I just decided to combine. I didn't just straight up, and I decided to spread them out as neatly as possible across the 2 dishes, and tried to purify. The reason I was only doing it with half the amount is just to make sure I had a in case I messed up. Once I got it, started adding some, then I mixed it all around, and I kept adding more kerosene when I felt I needed it, but in all, the goal was to use as little as possible. For another few minutes, this beaker was going to be big enough, a larger one, and I washed the beaker a few times with a small amount of kerosene dissolved, but I used way more kerosene than I expected. There was also so I poured everything off from this beaker into a new one. Particles that are played dissolve really easily into kerosene at all. So I think the main was just that my part really bad quality. Just for fun, I tested things out with my magli, a bunch of solids separated out. After seeing this, I had a lot less kerosene and off most of the junk. The good particles should have all just stayed in solution, and I probably could have gotten away. I still had to use this time, the beaker was just on top of it. It was then left to sit here undisturbed for about 24 hours. The basic idea here was that all the crappy particles would get pulled towards the magnet, but all the good ones would stay in solution. So I came back and
Делать это по-старому, секунд, когда начинаем. Наша задача просто на картинке и повторяем.
Видишь? Понимаете, какая ситуация? Задаюсь вопросом.
Game engines, but none more notorious than that. A game engine which 13 Final Fantasy versus 13.
Ну, наоборот.
Okay, so today I'm going to be doing something that I think is kind of, to get started, the beaker. Now the next thing that I'll need is a super sneaky called hexadiamine. 4.4 grams of it to the water all disappears. I'll move on to making the other solution that I need. Pretty simple, and the first ingredient is something called cyclohexane. I'll add about 100 ml and I'll pour in the last ingredient called adipoyl chloride. And now, I'm ready to do something nasty. To do this, I solution to a small beaker. I'll start with the center-based. I'll carefully pour in the cyclohexane one. These two, and like water and oil, they stay separate. Now, all to do is a gross slimy, and if I wrap it on a glass, pulling it out, I find that this looks pretty nasty. More specifically, it's nylon. I can keep pulling until the chemicals, and I'm left with something that kind of looks like a cocoon. If I try pulling it up, it's not. This is because if they were like they are in a fishing line, it would be a lot harder.
Видишь, если играть нормально, то это надо.
Знаниями и опытом. Если в интернете вопросы специально.
Thank